welcome to the Spotlight on Good Food Markets webinar, the first one of the year. So my name is Fatia, and I am going to be one of your co-hosts for this evening. For this morning. So before we begin, we're going to just do a quick land acknowledgement and just get right into the agenda for the event today. So FoodShare acknowledges that the sacred land in which we operate in is situated upon the traditional territories of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee allied nations to peacefully share and care for the lands around the Great Lakes. FoodShare recognizes the many nations of Indigenous peoples who presently live on the land, who have spent time here, and whose ancestors have hunted and gathered on the land known as Turtle Island. FoodShare recognizes and supports the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, applying both to our work. FoodShare also acknowledges the many people of African descent who are not settlers, but whose ancestors were forcibly displaced during this transatlantic slave trade, brought against their will and made to work on these lands. We believe that advancing Indigenous sovereignty is deeply and intrinsically linked to Black liberation, and we remain committed to advancing both. So before we just get right into it, I thought I would introduce myself. So I am a Bangladeshi queer emerging food security professional who in the last 6 years have helped to support and coordinate two markets, namely the U of T Scarborough Farmers Market and the Leslieville Farmers Market, alongside doing a number of research governance and campus-based food security initiatives. And so today I work at FoodShare as the Good Food Markets coordinator and your co-host for this webinar. And so again, thank you so much for joining us. So today for the agenda, we've got Tara, my lovely co-host, to do the introduction and conduct our year in review presentation. At 9:45, we'll be presenting the Scarborough Coop Market. At 10:15, we'll be introducing the Mabelle Good Food Market to speak on community engagement. And then at 10:45, we'll also have the Greenbelt Farmers Market Network to speak on winterizing markets and navigating COVID-19 protocols. At 11:15, we'll have a Q&A session for more questions. And then at 11:30, we'll be having a brainstorm session and closing. And so this brainstorm session is going to be an opportunity to speak to other GFMs and hear from one another from those who are attending the webinar today. So please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're located and if you are connected to an organization or are an interested resident in starting a good food market. So yes, please let us know. So just a little bit about FoodShare. So FoodShare's goal is to center food security in all of our work. And by taking our cue from those who are most affected by poverty and food security, we are hoping to inspire long-term solutions in our food systems that are rooted in the principles of food justice. And for us, this means working to dismantle systematic forms of oppression that exist in our food system and our food movement. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to Tara.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see so many people attending this Monday morning. Good to see you all and to have you here at our webinar. So I'm the Good Food Market Senior Coordinator at FoodShare. So I've had the opportunity over the last 5 years to connect with good food markets across Toronto and support their startup and their sustainability. And I've also been for almost 12 years, for 11 years now, the volunteer coordinator of the Waterfront Good Food Market, which is a volunteer resident run good food market in my neighborhood of Toronto, which is the Bathurst and Lakeshore neighborhood, for those of you who are familiar with Toronto. I see somebody in my neighborhood smiling. Hi, Dimitri. So I come to speak to you both from kind of a FoodShare perspective and also from like Fatia as well, coordinating markets and kind of understanding what's some of the challenges on the ground in running markets. Oh, sorry, I should have been showing you guys the agenda there. As Fatia mentioned, this is the agenda, and if just we just wanted to have you take a look. We realize it might be a long morning for some of you who are at work. So if there are particular parts that you'd like to see, you can try and make sure you check in for those. It would be great to have you all here for the whole thing. And we look forward to being able to chat intermarket at the brainstorm session before closing out at lunchtime. So Good Food Markets, we realize that we have a lot of a variety of people attending today. So just wanted to kind of go over kind of an overview of our concept of Good Food Markets. So when we talk about Good Food Markets, we're talking about community markets that sell high quality, culturally appropriate, affordable fruits and vegetables. Could be other things as well. And these markets bring healthy produce into neighborhoods where it might not otherwise be available. There may be no affordable grocery store nearby, and something like a farmer's market might not be a viable option in that area. At FoodShare, we work to support the startup and sustainability of good food markets that are run by agencies and resident groups across Toronto. FoodShare sources and supplies the produce, provides trainings, advising, and some resource support. We have also supplied produce to Northern Ontario markets or food programs in Indigenous communities, although our mandate generally is kind of within Toronto. We have done that, and we are a Southern FoodShare is a Southern supplier with the Nutrition North Canada program that's able to facilitate the Nutrition North subsidy to fly-in communities in the North who order produce. Okay, so usually this training that we hold would have been on site at FoodShare, but we've had the opportunity with everything being pushed onto Zoom and having remote trainings that we're able to connect with all of you guys today. We do think that part of the gold in Good Food Markets trainings is also the experiences that you guys have as experts in your own communities. And so I just do want to point out that we do have a brainstorm kind of discussion session within the last half an hour from 11:30 to 12, and that we would love to see people participate in that and share and hear from each other about the successes and challenges of markets. If you guys have questions for each other, that would be a great time to do that. And we did want to be able to try and facilitate some of that, even though we're not in person here together. The markets that we support in Toronto are in such a variety of locations, the Good Food Markets. So some are in seniors buildings, seniors residences, community health centers, other community centers, university or college campuses or campus residences, settlement agencies, churches, parks, Toronto community housing, apartment buildings, that's the subsidized housing in Toronto, or in their lobbies or their community rooms. And we're increasingly seeing interest from food banks to be providing fresh produce alongside the offerings that they're trying to make to their communities. So this has definitely been a challenging last year for a lot of people in a lot of ways, and definitely challenging for markets as well. So when COVID started and kind of shut everything down in March 2020, a lot of Good Food Markets did shut down initially. There are university and college markets that we don't expect to be returning right now, as you know, students are not on campus, many of them this year. So the need for those markets are that need has been dispersed from those campuses. seniors markets as well, in seniors buildings where you have a lot of people that are really at higher risk if they catch COVID. Some of those markets have not come back due to the high risk to those populations. And normal market activities and engagement has been really challenging because, you know, normal activities that you'd want to have at a market, food tastings, demos, you know, children's activities where people are interacting, or art activities that are hands-on, are things that we're feeling like we can't do right now. So it's been a challenging year. At the same time, we want to recognize that good food markets in neighborhoods have really brought that food access close, continued to bring that food access close to home. And that's been a real asset during COVID. It's helped people to avoid having to take public transit. It's offered safer shopping than large, busy grocery stores. It's offered deliveries to people who really need it in their neighborhood, like the seniors or people who are at high risk. And it's accommodated for particular neighborhoods in particular ways because of the knowledge that those markets and those agencies or resident groups have about their own neighborhood. There's been an increasing awareness of the recognition of people struggling to eat well. A lot of advocacy around markets to recognize them as essential services and not just, you know, non-essential special events. And we've seen the successful navigation of of COVID protocols and guidelines by markets. In 2020, we did see the emergence of 6 new good food markets that we worked with to help start up. So that was also a kind of silver lining for us last year, that despite everything that was going on, people were feeling the need to continue bringing this food directly into their communities. Volunteerism continues to be high, with people recognizing the important role that markets play. So this morning we get to hear firsthand from 3 different markets about their own successes and struggles throughout the last year, with the focus on running during COVID, community engagement, and running your market through the winter. So I invite you to type your questions in the chat. We will have a little bit of time after each presentation, as well as a kind of Q&A session at the end of all 3 speakers. So do put your questions in the chat, and we'll keep track of them. And so the first market that I'd like to introduce is the Scarborough Co-op Market, which started in the summer of 2020 and is housed at the West Scarborough Neighborhood Community Center. This market was initiated by residents who saw the need for a market in that area. And I'd like to pass it to Maria and Chelsea to tell us about the startup of their market in the middle of all of this COVID craziness, and tell us about how it has developed.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Chelsea. I'm just going to share my screen and some slides we have for you. Okay, can everybody see that? Yeah, okay. So yeah, we started the Scarborough Co-op Market last year, and I am one of the people who started, and Maria is our somewhat new market coordinator, so I'll let her introduce herself first.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks for sharing the space with me. Just as a little warning, my internet is not very helpful this morning, so if it goes bad, I'll just turn my camera off, but hopefully we'll make it through. So yes, I'm the current coordinator of the Scarborough Co-op Market. I started in November, and I'm so happy to be there. It's been an amazing experience, and I'm so excited to tell you all more about it and more about our role there in the community, my role personally in the market, and what we're going to do to keep building our little community all around food.
And yeah, I'm Chelsea. I lived in the neighborhood that the market started in. So we're in Southwest Scarborough in a neighborhood called Oak Ridge. And I actually had to move this past fall, but I am still in Scarborough and still very connected to that community and the market. And so a little bit about how we started. I had been involved in some food organizing in the neighborhood, just some small stuff, and a lot of it focused around like charitable giving. And I think it's right now it's essential, and you know, it's filling a gap that we, you know, there is a need and there's nothing filling that gap. And so I understand the need for it, but I think the conversation has evolved, and there has been a lot of conversation about how that's not really a sustainable model, and it's not, you know, great for people in terms of food access, in terms of sustainability, and also just the dignity to be able to pick your own food and like be part of a community that is taking care of each other. And so we kind of really started thinking about like, what does that look like? What would a community, like food access in a community look like that is, you know, accessible to everybody and meets everyone's needs and it's affordable for people. And so we started thinking of the Scarborough Coop Market, and I did a lot of that work with Johanna Mahari. I met her through Scarborough, Climate Justice Scarborough, and she has a lot of passion for food justice and also is from the Scarborough area. And so the idea of what we wanted the market to be is Scarborough, and especially Scarborough Southwest, is a very mixed income neighborhood. So, you know, there's a lot of little bungalows that are getting knocked down and they're becoming, you know, $2 million homes. But then there's lots of apartment buildings, lots of public housing, and also lots of people who have stayed from, you know, a long time ago, lots of seniors. And so we thought, you know, there's an opportunity. We wanted to be able to bring food that is local and food that, you know, is produced in an ethical way without, you know, exploitative labor practices. But often that food is too expensive for a lot of people to afford. And so something that we thought about is bridging that gap and doing that through having the Good Food Market, having affordable produce alongside of other items, and having kind of basically people who can afford to pay more be able to pay more, and then be able to have a way to make it affordable for everybody. So that's what we're trying to do at the Scarborough Coop Market, and FoodShare support is a huge part of how we're able to do that. And it was a very interesting process opening last year. So we applied actually in 2019 for a grant through Community Food Centers Canada to start a new market. And we found out about it, that we got this grant in February. So we were planning for the market to open in May around, you know, market time. And we had all these outdoor activities that we were planning to do and kind of all this community gathering. And then the pandemic happened, and we had to change a lot of our plans and what the market was going to end up looking like, which actually led to some good things. So some of the great things about starting at that time, we learned to be really flexible. We learned to think of a model that would work in any phase of any kind of lockdown. So we originally were just going to be an in-person market, and we switched so that we could have online pre-ordering. We have pickup, curbside pickup. We have no contact delivery. And so we ended up having to build all of that infrastructure during that time. And the really nice thing about that is it made the market more accessible to more people than we had originally kind of considered. We thought about physical accessibility and, you know, like the physical space of where the market was, and the community center is wheelchair accessible and different things like that that we considered. But we didn't think about, well, what about the people who can't attend that market time? It's only once a week. So how do we reach people who might be working or might have childcare needs or might not be able to leave their home? And then in the pandemic, so many more people kind of were in that position where they might not feel comfortable leaving their home. So I was really thankful in the end that we got to consider more of that stuff. And we got to be pretty creative about the solutions in terms of, you know, I've never built a website before, so that was an interesting experience. And, you know, we learned a lot of new skills and got to connect with different people doing similar things and learned a lot. So those were kind of the highlights. And some of the harder parts, I think it was really hard to connect with the community in the way that we had envisioned. So we really thought of it as a meeting place, as somewhere where people could buy things, but also just spend time and hang out. And, you know, we had planned to serve food or drinks. We had planned to have activities and events. And kind of all of that went out the window. And that was kind of, it was hard. But also just people were afraid to come out and check out something new. I think a lot of people, we partnered with West Scarborough Community Center, and that's great because, you know, there's a built-in community who already accesses those facilities, and we got to meet a lot of people through that, and we were really excited to connect with some of the programs there. But almost all of their programs shut down during the pandemic, and a lot of things went online, and they had a very big seniors program, and some seniors, when it was outdoors, felt comfortable, but a lot of people, they didn't want to leave their homes. They weren't super comfortable with the internet. And so those were some of the things we had to work through and figure out what would work for the community. And I think something we're still working through in terms of connecting with the people that we want to in the neighborhood. And so yeah, that is an ongoing challenge. And I think it's just in the pandemic, people have so many additional stresses, and the stresses that were already there are heightened. And so I think people have less capacity for new things and for more community engagement. And so that's something that we're working through as well, and finding that capacity and making a space for people. And we had really great online engagement. So we had an Instagram and a Facebook page, and we had a lot of interest and people really, really supportive. But we found that it didn't necessarily translate to who was actually accessing the market. Most of the people who come to the market are local people who maybe have heard about it through the community center, and are not necessarily as plugged into the online platforms. And you know, we had a lot of engagement online, and those same numbers may not have translated into in-person engagement. So that was something we had to kind of puzzle through and figure out. Maybe that's not the best way to reach people. How do we meet people when we're supposed to be distancing? And so yeah, that was a challenge as well. And I think Maria can speak to a little bit too about like how online and in person makes kind of a double workload.
Exactly. So just so everyone understands how we work, we have our online store that is open from Saturday to about Wednesday, so people can place their pre-orders. Those are pre-orders that'll be either for pickup or delivery on Fridays. And then on Fridays, we open for in-person shopping. So everything is completed on Fridays, but throughout the week, people place their orders. And so since we're talking about running markets through the winter, it's been difficult to really figure out how much to order each week, how much produce to order, because you never know how many people are going to show up. The first week that we opened in this year, I barely ordered anything because I figured we're in a lockdown, barely anyone's going to come. But the people who did come were disappointed to see that we didn't have much selection. The following, now recently, we've started to gain a little bit more momentum. Lots of people are coming in. So I order a little bit more after seeing that one week we do really well, and the following week we don't have those same numbers. So now we're starting to finally pick up some consistency. We're getting people who are regulars, which builds on those community connections. I'm recognizing faces, they're learning my name, I'm learning theirs. People get to ask the things that they want, and I do my best to ensure that I have oranges every week, because I know that the same mom is going to come each week to get oranges for her son. Or someone really wants to try plantain next week, so I'll try my best to get that. So that's a little bit of the challenge of having online and in person. And there's also several people who consistently are ordering through our online store for delivery, because we do deliveries in Scarborough. And I never get to meet them, but I see their name week after week. They send me little messages. They really like the pears that they had last week. So if I had some extra, I'll throw them in. And it's those kind of like human touches or extra connections that are hopefully building more of a network and more of the community building, regardless of if people are shopping online or in person. Back to what Chelsea was saying at the beginning of how mixed income our neighborhood is in Scarborough, that's been a big challenge for us as well, because we want to make sure that everyone can access our market, that our market is representative of the community that we're in. But how do I make it an equal space for everyone when I have someone who doesn't have to worry about how much they're spending, and they want to source all of their weekly groceries from us, potentially taking away, or not taking away, but making it so that the next mom that comes doesn't have the same amount of selection. So I don't want to limit anyone's access to our market, and I don't want to tell folks who have higher incomes to not come to us, because they're the ones who can, their spending can support the market long term. But it is kind of balancing our stock, balancing our quantity, and making sure that no matter who comes in and what time they come in, they'll be able to get the most out of our market experience. So a lot of that is just, it's growing pains of really building consistency and balance in our work. And it's also just trying to connect to our community more and seeing who's going to come week after week. Yeah, so talking about where we are today, right now we're going through a really great transitional period where we're getting more people. Consistently, we're getting more people to sign up as members for our market, because we do have that option, getting more orders through our online store, which are all things that we want, of course. This is how we're going to sustain this market throughout the long term. But one of the biggest issues with that is just our physical capacity to take this on. So right now I am the sole market coordinator, and Chelsea gives me all the support that she can. But week after week, I'm the sole body there doing the work. And we have a great pool of volunteers who want to come and support, but I also need to respect their safety and their willingness to come out when we are in a lockdown and we're on a pandemic. So that's just the physical capacity to get the work done is a bit of a growing pain as we get more orders week after week. We also want to, of course, stay affordable and stay sustainable. So we have great folks who are participating in our community, in our market as members, who are sending me recommendations for things that we could sell. For example, we recently started featuring spent goods products at our market, and that's all thanks to one of our members who thought that it would be a great idea and who would love to see their bread products with us. So now we're selling those, and those are doing great. And that is just one example of how our market is growing with our community. One of the biggest things that's been challenging is reaching the immediate neighborhood. So like we said, we are in a community center, and we're flanked on one side by like a great residential area, and on the other side by high rises. And what's interesting to see is you would expect those to be our main customer base, and instead we're getting folks from all over Scarborough. So we're brainstorming and we're thinking of ways that we can reach those immediate people, the people in the high rises that we want to be our like consistent community and shopper base, and also so that we get the word out there and so that people who are interested in shopping sustainably, ethically, and locally can come to us as well. So as for our current COVID protocols, we're extremely lucky to be operating out of the community center, and they do all of the health screening at the door. So, oh, I think someone. Mike might be
A
on.
ver, no sé si vos querés, pero aparte depende del software donde está.
Thanks, Marina. So they do all of the screening at the door, they do the temperature checks and all of the questions. We make sure, and they as well, that we're limiting the number of shoppers in our market area, which is sometimes when things pick up and we get a little busy, is also a balancing act of making sure that people don't have to wait too long so that their shopping experience isn't impacted, but so that we're keeping everyone safe as well. Like we said, we have our community is very diverse in terms of backgrounds as well and languages that are spoken. So sometimes there are some communication issues in making sure that everyone understands that we need to keep our distance, that you don't look in other people's shopping bags, and that everyone is kept separate and safely separate. As for packing, everyone shops at a grocery store and cares about picking the best produce or the best pear out of the bunch. So people want to touch and feel and make sure that they're getting the best one. So we do have to communicate that that's not allowed, that I should be the only person handling it. I sanitize my hands, there's gloves available and there's masks available for everyone as well. And soon, very soon, we're so excited to be moving back outdoors where we can attract more folks, where people feel safer shopping from us, and where it's just a better experience overall. We really want to not be a grocery store for people, because these good food markets are about more than just a place where you can buy your produce. And I think that going back outside, returning to more of that farmers market feel, will really help us in the long run and help us reach our community more profoundly. So what's next? Like I said, we're so excited to be going back outside in the spring, and we want to make that as big an event as possible. Right now, Scarborough is lacking in farmers markets, and that's an experience that folks are yearning for. So we want to be able to at least have some days in the summer that, that operate as an actual farmers market. And hopefully with that, we can bring events back outside and connect with people. And long term, we are called the Scarborough Co-op Market, so we do want to bring that structure into our market and embody that vision. Right now, people can sign up to be members. An annual membership costs $25, and you'll get 15% off each of your orders. But to build that co-op structure, you need to have a certain capacity for it, like a certain number of members, certain number of people devoted to giving their time to create this into a co-op. So right now we're in that process. My role right now is to at least give us a strong and steady foundation so that when we are ready to take that next step, we're able to do it. Chelsea, do you want to share some of your ideas for our future?
Yeah, I think the big thing is being outside definitely gives us more opportunities, and also hopefully we see things opening up more. So like we were talking about, we had plans to actually be able to go into some of those high rises and meet people, or have a little pop-up near them to get to connect with people in the neighborhood. It can be really hard to connect with people, especially in buildings, because you can't flyer in the same way that you could flyer a house. You can't, depending on the way the building is set up, you might not be able to post on their bulletin board or that kind of thing. And so being able to actually meet more people and connect with them, and also be able to connect through the community center as they open up more programming with people. We're really excited to do that and be able to kind of reach the neighborhood at large. And as well, we're excited to get some new things in the market as people start growing things in locally. So we connected with a great greenhouse that's actually operating in Scarborough, and we're excited to start being able to offer their produce. And we've offered produce last summer through Black Farmers Collective and Sundance Harvest. And so there's a few different things that we're really excited for in the growing season. And through FoodShare, there's so many different things that become available as the season changes too. So we're always excited for spring and for growing. And yeah, I think the main thing is the thing that we're looking for is that community connection and building that, as we had to be so separate. And we're looking forward to coming back together. During the summer, we had a lot more volunteers who were excited and wanted to be there in person and felt comfortable. And once it moved indoors, that was one of the tough things about winterizing the market, is that it was a smaller space. The room was small, so we could only have a certain number of people at the market at one time. And so when you have, you know, the balance of customers and people helping out, it was a pretty limited amount of people that we were allowed to have in that space. And people just felt less comfortable through the winter, through the second lockdown. And so we kind of miss connecting with all of our volunteers. And so that's something that we're excited about going forward as well. So just to kind of bring it all together, some of the main lessons that we learned through this experience is flexibility is key. So the things you might be planning for might and probably won't be the thing that actually happens. So as much as you can have a flexible model, that's really helpful. Be open to changes and be realistic about expectations. So this is a very strange time, and who knows what is going to happen. And that's okay, you know. The only thing you can do is get started or keep going and be able to adjust as things come up. And so that's something that we really learned and kind of figured out. And then partnerships were so important. Having the opportunity to be in the community center was such a helpful thing for us. So as Maria mentioned, they helped so much with the house screening because they did that already at their front doors. And then they also had all of the infrastructure already in place. So they've been so supportive. And there's community centers in so many places. And, you know, like the reason that I connected with them is I was like, I brought my kids there for their early on program, and I met people through there. And so those were the people who were my neighbors and who lived there. And that was like, it was a really nice way to start the market is just where you live and being able to connect with people. So looking for the partnerships in the neighborhood is really great. And accessibility. So thinking about is the way that you offer food accessible, not just in the physical space, but you know, we had to think a lot about like who has internet access. Is this an easy to operate system to order things online? We're looking into, you know, the possibility of could people place a phone order, different things like that, or is email easier, you know? So there's a lot of different things to consider, and making it work for your neighborhood. Everybody's neighborhood will have different needs in terms of what people have access to. And so looking at your neighborhood, knowing the people who are using your market, as Maria said, we've grown a lot just with the people who use our market. So they'll let us know what works for them, what they need. There's been people who say, you know, somebody couldn't cut up their squash, but really loved to buy the squash. So that's something that we could easily accommodate. So just listening to people, getting their feedback, really welcoming feedback, really helped us adjust the market and make it accessible to people. And yeah, many hands make the work light. It is very, it takes a lot of organization. And, you know, I didn't plan to leave. I didn't plan to have to move. And that's just something that kind of happened. And the only way the market was sustainable is that there were lots of other people involved. And Maria came on board, and just being able to have many people be able to do all the different aspects of the market really helped us kind of make it through a lot of ups and downs. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything else, Maria.
I think that covers it all. Really just, yeah, I spent my time there in November, and every month is different. So really, I can't expect what comes next week. I can't expect what comes tomorrow, really, with the market, and that's one of the most exciting things. But what I try to keep at the center of everything I do is about the community. So you know, if there's a vendor that the community is interested in or that they're not, I just try to make it as representative of the people around us as possible.
This was an awesome presentation. Thank you so much, Chelsea and Maria. It's so amazing to see how your market you focused your market in such an organic manner to grow around the needs of the community and to respond and pivot around the community, what they want, and just, you know, your long-term plans as well as a co-op to see how it can serve and involve the community even more. So we're going to just take a couple of questions right now. We have one question from Elizabeth. Did you operate cash free or was cash an option?
Cash is an option. We use Square for all of our processing, so people can pay with cash or they use the little thing to pay with credit or debit.
Great. And can you tell me a little bit, just like a little bit about how was your experience starting up using Square? Was it a relatively easy process? How was that, just setting up the Square?
I'll let Chelsea answer that. That was her.
Yeah, we looked into a couple different options. I know there's a couple of different operating systems now. The thing that was nice about Square, it gives free software to build an online store. So we looked into a couple different options for being able to build an online platform, and a lot of them were just so expensive. And like we were just starting out, and you know, we didn't know how big we would be, or you know, we didn't have kind of like a budget that was set. And so that was really, really helpful. And then their hardware is really portable. It can work with any operating system, so like Apple or Microsoft or Android or whatever. It can work on a phone. So it's really portable and it's really easy in that way. And we thought it was really important to offer cash as an option because there's a lot of people who will only use cash, or they're dropping in, they're picking up their kid from like there's some daycare programs. And so if they're picking up their kid from that, they might only have cash with them. So we wanted to make it available that way. The only downside is there's no upfront cost. The hardware, I think it was, the small one is $15 to buy. But so there's that upfront cost, but they do have like a service fee. So you do have to be mindful of the fact that there is a service charge, and you kind of have to build that into your price or your costs, what you expect your costs to be.
Great. Okay, so I see there's more questions coming into the chat, and I'm just going to ask Fatia to just triage those for the Q&A session a little later. So we're trying to stay on schedule. So for sure, all of those questions in the chat, we're going to aim to get to them in our dedicated Q&A session for all of our speakers after all three have spoken. So we hope you can stay with us for that. And next, we're gonna have Nicolette Felix, who coordinates the Mabelle Good Food Market in the Islington and Bloor area of Toronto, for those people who are familiar. It's run by an arts organization, Mabelle Arts. And their market is always a delight to see, visually and socially engaging, while connecting with their neighborhood residents on their most basic needs. And so I'm gonna pass it over to Nicolette.
Right.
To present.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Great to hear all of these stories. It's very supportive. I think that we're all going through something that's quite similar. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the Mabelle Pantry. We started out as Mabelle Arts, which is a community-based arts organization. And that was started in 2007. Because of their connection to the community, when COVID hit in March of last year, they went out to serve the members of their community because they asked them what they needed during that time. And undeniably, everyone responded that they needed food. So Leah, our director, went out in her car and went grocery shopping to serve the 10 most vulnerable households living on Mabelle Avenue. Today is quite a different story. In July of last year, people were still expressing the need for food, and because it's such an underserved area, it was quite difficult for folks to come out. Um, so I started working for Mabelle Arts as the food security lead and had a wonderful staff, a youth staff team. Many of them had grown up on Mabelle Avenue, so were able to inform us about the needs of those living on the block. And we got together and piloted this pantry, this food market, in a small park that's housed on a block of 5 or 6 Toronto community housing buildings. And we worked together to try and create this outdoor market with a shopping feel. And we just waited to see who would come out. At the time that we started the market, we had 65 people who attended. Today, we're seeing more than 160 attendees each week. So we were able to partner with FoodShare and provide a wide variety of choice of fruits and vegetables at no cost to members living on Mabelle Avenue. We realized that as the weeks progressed, more and more people were coming out to the market, expressing a need for fresh produce. We were learning what people needed. At the beginning, it was actually a challenge because folks were not used to getting any type of fresh fruit and veg from the local food bank, or it was very minimal. So over time, we connected with our community. We asked them what they needed. The park being a wonderful place at the time during the summer where we could still listen and talk and chat, we found out what people really needed and changed our purchasing habits. What we realized is that although there were local food banks operating in the area, people really wanted to have that experience of shopping and coming down to the park and just connecting with other community members. They had been used to that because of Mabelle Arts and all of the activities and animation that existed in that park prior to COVID. So it seemed like an optimal opportunity to find out what folks needed and just to kind of get people outside of their living spaces and, you know, just checking out what the activity was in the park. This is just a little bit of information to give you an idea of what we do. And the fact that we've gone from, you know, our 10 households to 400 households is a testament to the connection that the community is really craving and the need for food. Each week now, despite the weather and the second lockdown, we're noticing that we're seeing about 10% new attendees. I imagine that part of that is just because of the excitement and the animation that occurs in the park. Even though we're not able to stay and gather, there's still that sense of community and the desire to connect with people. We are also engaging in food deliveries to our most vulnerable folks. It has been difficult due to the lockdown, but what we've tried to encourage is a delivery system where we go only to the lobby. We'll go to the door for our most vulnerable folks, but we're still trying to make sure that everybody gets what they need. So every week for us, it's necessary to make market reminder calls and also check in on folks, which is one of the things that Mabelle Arts has always done. And we've been able to connect with our community both through the Mabelle Pantry, but also through other programs like the Listening Room, and then just our regular market reminder calls, checking in on folks and making sure that they're doing well and maintaining sort of a wellness check in addition to finding out what people might need. Basically, what we are trying to do is take control of the setting and invite folks out, because what we want to do is make food security, actually want to make food security beautiful and provide folks with an opportunity to connect. So this is basically a photograph of our first summer setting. You know, we took it, we had no experience, we didn't know what to expect. The youth staff were heavily involved. They really know what folks on the block need. They've grown up on the block, and they offered a lot of advice and let us know how people wanted to be served. So we maintained our mandate to stay outdoors, make it as beautiful as possible so that we could attract community members and have them come out and talk. At the time, we were able to still gather to a certain extent. And we began by setting up these tents and just really double downing on having this shopping model so that people would come out and select what they needed, talk to us about what they wanted, and just have an opportunity to connect in the park. In terms of community engagement, although we weren't able to have large gatherings, we still had our folks from the listening room come down with a story net. Our community members were able to sit socially distanced and just talk to us about, you know, how they were feeling. And we realized that it was actually about more than just the food. They were coming to connect and find out what other people were doing. Everyone was so isolated at that point that, you know, we were finding that people were coming by just to say hello. So this is one of our earlier iterations of the market. It is true that we had to maintain flexibility. Every week it was changing, our numbers were growing, we were getting more and more donations. So it was very much a work in progress for us. Again, you know, the word was getting out. We were at this point not charging for our produce. We initially had the idea that we would do that, but at this particular point in time, it was not really a model that was going to work for us. So this is a picture of some of our youth staff, always welcoming, connecting with community, finding out what vegetables they really wanted. So we were ordering produce items that were culturally appropriate. I think people really enjoyed having that choice model, and we listened and we ordered accordingly. We also had some challenges in determining quantities. Feel like we're probably not the only organization that struggles with storage space. And we were trying to manage our numbers and figure out what to do with surplus. As our numbers grew, of course, we got to the point where we were, you know, pretty much selling out by the end of the day. So this was pretty much the early days. We didn't have as much delivery, but what we did do was we engaged some of our community members to deliver to the lobby and to the door for our most vulnerable folks. So we were really maintaining relationships with those in the community and building trust. And we found that that was the most effective way to take care of those who were not able to make it down to our market in the park. Okay, I seem to have trouble moving to the next slide. Sorry about that. So this is part of the evolution of our market. What was really great is that at one point we were able to actually start up our fire pit as the weather got colder. And a lot of our seniors were coming out early because they wanted to get a spot by the fire. And this is a picture of our artistic director biding time while we set up and just engaging community members in stretching while keeping warm. And socially distanced. And this is a perfect example of how we were able to engage our community and still have them come out despite the weather and continue with animation in the park. So really it was about keeping the connection to the park, having an opportunity to engage, and then also to leave at the end of the day with, you know, fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. The Mabelle Park has really become a place to gather. And one of the challenges for us was just how we were going to maintain the number of people moving through the market, and how we were going to control, the movement through the market so that people were not waiting in line. Of course, this challenge grew as our numbers grew. So we became very inventive by having these periods of time where we could find out what people wanted, maybe have some stretching, make them feel welcome, and just keep the regularity of the visit to the park part of what we were offering. Really, our park setup had to evolve because of the snow. One of the challenges was how we would control the crowds and still sort of give it a non-food bank feel. And so what we did was we brought our caravan forward. That's the classic caravan that's always been in Mabelle Park, and then went up to Northern Ontario and secured this ice fishing hut that was used as another outbuilding. And then way in the back, we have our woodshed. And so in terms of market design, we were able to control the flow through the market by designating these outbuildings to accommodate the arrival of community members by the building number on Mabelle Avenue, which allowed us to have more social distancing, and then also less of a lineup during the cold weather. As I said before, we had 60% of our attendees are seniors. We're finding that they're actually the most ready and willing to come out early to the market because we're actually their only resource for fresh fruit and veg. They're not able to easily access public transport or get themselves to, even a grocery store. And so that's probably why we're seeing an increase in attendance. It's turned out to be a delightful experience. We're still able to connect and hear about how people are doing. Most of our community members, if you'll find out if someone's having difficulty accessing the market, or if there are doctor's appointments, or if someone's in the hospital, we really rely on those stories to make sure that we're able to connect with people who need the produce more than anyone else at that time. So for the moment, we are serving mainly folks on Mabelle Avenue. We are seeing people coming from other areas, and we'll continue to provide this model until such time that we can work on a cash payment system. This is really the market setup period that we have had to accommodate due to the weather, and then also what our outdoor needs are. So most of the market staff are on site as of 9 a.m. Our market doesn't open until 3. So having this beautification piece and setting up our animation is really something that we value. And with the 6-hour setup, it's something that we're committed to. It's actually a shift from our shopping model, which was in some ways faster for us to set up. But now, because of the second lockdown, we are trying to pre-package for our attendees. We may sometimes have a small table of select goods or last minute donations that we're able to offer. But for the most part, we are pre-packaging based on the needs that have been identified to us. We have learned some of the learnings is that we really need a lot of hands on deck to get this set up in a way that is efficient, but then also provides this beautiful setting and allows us to welcome folks and be ready. That listening is important. We hear from our community members what works and what doesn't, and exactly what they need. It's interesting. Most of them do not hesitate to give us their opinion. And that's why we value that connection. So that is one of the most important things to us. We're really, really happy that we're able to provide such a high quality of fresh produce and you know, fruit and veg. But we're listening, and we're changing our model. You know, we're open, we're flexible. Um, and one of the things that never stops us from showing up is the weather. So we're really maintaining that, you know, trust that we're going to be out there and that we're going to provide food to more than 4,000 residents on the block. And we'll continue doing it despite what happens with the pandemic. This is a classic example of how we've been able to encourage folks to maintain social distancing. I think that at the very beginning, it was a critical point for a lot of people. They were coming to the market. They were really, really worried about their food supply. And it was difficult to keep people socially distanced and it, you know, let them know that we were going to be there and we provide food for them. Over time, the messaging, you know, it works. It's difficult, but it works. And folks were able to come out and respect what they had to do in order to access food. And we continue to do it. We continue to make a lot of noise. We don't have it at the moment, but in the summertime, we had musicians and we had music. And it's really about making that visit to the park a fun time, and making folks feel like, you know, we're listening and that their opinion is important and that we'll get them what they need. I think that one of the challenges that we're having right now and is that, you know, we are offering the produce at no charge. So more and more folks are coming. We are trying to communicate, but we also, you know, realize that there's a barrier both with online presence and online access, because a lot of our seniors don't have access to a computer. So we're still sort of on the phone. A lot of people don't have voicemail, so communication is often a challenge. There is often a language barrier as well, and we're seeing more and more folks come out and trying to explain what might happen or how those changes might happen. Is you know, a struggle in terms of access. So we do a lot of postering. We rely on old school phone calls, which also allows us to find out how people are doing, but it's not always the fastest way to communicate with our community members. This is just an example of how, you know, we're really wanting to beautify the park and how people appreciate it and come out, and that there is always time to chat. That, you know, we want to encourage people to continue to come, that our community wants us to thrive. They want us to work together, and that when we thrive, we know we can grow and then have the space to educate and do some planning as to how we might expand our offerings and also the number of people that we serve in the Mabelle Park. On the horizon for us really is we're wanting to, you know, seed community-led micro businesses such as cafes, workshops, and offer ready-made meals, snacks, and really expand our market offerings. Obviously, we want to make sure that those are led by community members that are earning a decent wage. We want to channel funds back into our community and provide them with resources to tackle food insecurity. This is not a handout. We're listening. We're trying to figure out what people need. We're committed to engaging youth staff and, you know, really focusing on programming and how we can get residents involved. We're essentially bringing folks on the block back to the park to connect, expand on our food service offerings, and then really focus on programming. So it's a lot about our connection and maintaining that connection to our community. This is really just us. This is really what we affectionately call the Mabelle Abbey Road. At the end of our workday, we're taking down the park. We're meeting folks along the way. This is to some extent, or has become, a bit of our Mabelle uniform. People stop us all along the block. They know that we're headed to the park. They identify us by our jackets. They can let us know if they need something on the last minute or just what's happening in their day. It's really become something that's quite lovely, where it really shows that we're in it together. We're committed to continue providing food and to listening really to what our community on Mabelle Avenue needs. So yeah, we're just on this crazy journey together. All right.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicolette, for your awesome presentation and the awesome pics. I've been begging Nicolette for pics of her market forever, and bugging and bugging and bugging. So it's awesome to see the pics, and it's awesome to hear like how you've managed to I don't know, attempt to do something so huge and just continue plotting toward accomplishing it, including serving so many people, continuing to do it in a free model, connecting, one-on-one with so many residents with, challenges to, using online platforms, language challenges, all of this, as well as staying outside in the whole winter. So it's amazing to see how you're accomplishing and working through all of these things. We've got a couple questions, and we can maybe take questions for about 5 minutes. And then the rest of the questions for Nicolette will move to the Q&A later as well. So we have a question from Sarah Ramsey. What do you do with your surplus goods?
Well, we don't have surplus goods as much as we had before. So we have access to a very small fridge. And I can say now that we've been, selling out, and we've gotten a lot better at ordering. But our numbers keep going up. So if we do have surplus, it's really not very much, and we're able to keep it for the next week. Anything that's really perishable, you're the lucky person that gets that extra at the end of the day. We just find that we're always having a few people come later when we're taking down the market. So we really try not to keep anything. And it just hasn't been an issue because our numbers are growing so quickly.
Okay. And this question may take up the next 4 minutes. It's the question on everybody's mind. A lot of people who registered wanted to hear about funding, and obviously funding for a regular market, and for yours, where you're able to provide free produce every week to so many people. How are you able to support not charging attendees for market items and support so much work? It's a lot of physical work, demands a lot of people. How are you able to support this? How do you guys do it?
Well, I have to say we have an awesome fundraising team. They, in terms of grant writing and fundraising, really they're just at it all the time, from all kinds of sources, provincial, federal, municipal, where there's an opportunity, they're on it. And so we've been able to secure that. I mean, I would say probably because there are some more funds available on that food security piece. It's on everyone's mind. There are grants, and we could not do it without such an amazing fundraising and grant writing team. And it's a job. I mean, it's a lot of reporting, and it's a lot of time that's spent. And that's really the only way that we're able to do that. Our numbers, though, being where they are, and also because we're seeing interest from neighborhoods that are not just, Mabelle Avenue, we are looking to see what our options might be. And this is in development. I'd love to hear from folks that shifted from a model, even that was pay what you can, to purchasing. I'd be interested to know what that's like. I imagine at some point we're going to have to transition, and I'm really looking at that pay what you can to then having, you know, a square or some type of payment system so that other neighborhoods can come and visit our market, and then also perhaps purchase, you know, locally made uh, foods and jarred items and preserves. So, you know, looking at expansion, and certainly the idea of a membership is very attractive. We're fortunate to be able to do this, you know, for this period of time, but definitely looking towards other options in the future.
Great. So I hope she's answered your question, Marina, about donations. And do you get donations from residents in the area who want to support what you're doing from like kind of the larger neighborhood there?
Yeah, it's funny. We've had some people start, you know, dropping off mainly obviously like canned goods and dried goods, and it's a new thing for us. I think just because of our geographical location, a lot of people are not even aware of where Maybelle Avenue is, and it really does sit in this sort of pocket behind Bloor and Islington. So it's not like we get a lot of foot traffic for folks who are not living in the area. And I think people are starting to notice, and definitely notice us more, I would say, in the warmer weather when there's a lot going on, like arts and animation. It's very attractive, right, to want to come by the market. So we are seeing a small increase in, you know, members of the public coming by and dropping off goods, but not enough to, you know, not enough to support our market, let's say.
Well, I was asking more in terms of financial donations.
Yes, so we are seeing definitely, because of social media, we are seeing more financial donations as well.
Okay.
It's made a big difference, that social media piece that can sort of fall by the wayside because we're also busy having put more focus on that. We're having more financial donations coming in.
Great. Thank you so much for talking to us about the work you're doing.
Thank
And
you.
now I'd like to introduce Daniel Taylor from the Greenbelt Farmers Market Network, an organization that aims to increase the success of farmers markets in our region. During COVID, I know they've helped farmers markets to pivot and to be able to function around the restrictions and guidelines that COVID has presented. And I know Daniel has also been involved in helping to organize a Good Food Market at the neighborhood food hub near the Gerrard and Coxwell area. So take it away, Daniel.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Sarah Ramsey. Speaking of Good Food Market at the neighborhood food hub, we're happy to see some folks we actually work with over there. So I'm going to just share my screen. That's the one. Okay. Did everyone see that? Is that seeable? All right, lovely. All right, so as Tara said, so I'm from Greenbelt Markets. One of the things we run is the Greenbelt Farmers Market Network. That's about 100 farmers markets placed around the Greenbelt kind of Golden Horseshoe area. We also do a number of other projects such as our neighborhood food hub, which is based upon kind of food security in the Coxwell and Gerrard neighborhood, where we've run a good food market in the past, and we have some secret plans for some more. Sorry, Sarah. And so really what we do a lot of is consulting on local food and fresh food projects with a real emphasis on emerging food security, and of course, building local food infrastructure. And that doesn't always mean local farmers. It just kind of means like local ownership of economy, of food, access, and distribution. You know, it was really, just want to say it was so great hearing the examples of some of the great work happening, and I do not know how I would do that. So this is going to be more of a general presentation about winterizing your market and surviving the suffering. Because I'll be honest, you know, a lot of people paint a rosy picture, but winter markets are challenging and they're hard. And they're not always the most fun, but they're the most rewarding. So first off, we can't, you know, to kind of address the elephant in the room, COVID-19, if you've heard of it. I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty of protocols, but I do want to say that if you're in Toronto, or whether actually if you're anywhere, your local public health unit will have a guidance for local food, fresh food markets, farmers markets, including good food markets. So I attached a link here, but I think the three things you want to kind of keep in mind as we think about examples of markets and how we kind of translate pre-COVID to post-COVID: space, flow, and patience. Emphasis on the third one. So I think, keeping those things in mind, you can also just check out the protocols themselves in Toronto. Lovely document. I won't go through it, but essentially this is everything that you need to know about how to make a safe market, either outside or inside. But for right now, we're going to talk about winter markets outside. Obviously, our main goal is to get a building somewhere. The best winter market is in the winter. But moving forward, as we see examples, we're going to have to imagine applying these principles. All right. So I'm going to start off with some examples of winter markets, both farmers markets that have kind of transitioned, and smaller markets as well. For good food markets, though, we're going to focus really on, not to sound too intense, but survivability, right? How do we survive outside? How do we make it a community space? And how do we do it in a way that we can sustain ourselves with it? Because it is a lot of work. And I think, as mentioned before, partnerships, fundraising, community engagement, these are all incredibly important things and strategies. So our first, and feel free to jump in because I'll talk a lot if not stopped. Our first example would be the down-to-earth farmers markets, and these are in New York City. So this is a network of markets that a portion of them operate outside. And when we see an outdoor market, this is not the image that most people have when they think about going to a good food market or a fresh food market outside. You imagine parks and some kind of lounging, but really it's that vibrant, colorful, fresh produce thing that we're attracted to. So this is a great example of just like, you have to prepare. And I'm sorry about the presentation before me. That was the most beautiful outdoor market I've ever seen. So let's scratch that example because that's an anomaly. Great job. But we got to prepare to tighten things up, right? You want to think as cozy as you can. What we see is a farmer's truck parked right up against his stall. So we want to take a spread out kind of model that, especially during COVID, we want to bring our infrastructure close together. This is another example of a farmer's market kind of on the estuary of fall to winter. And really, you're going to see less customers. I think that's one thing we have to prepare for, but it doesn't always mean you'll see less sales. So what we see in winter markets around Toronto is we have fewer customers spending more money when they're there. And often that's due to kind of community engagement that you engage in before the winter happens. How do you identify those customers that are always there in the rain or snow, and give them incentives to make that their main source of grocery shopping? We have the McGolrick Park Winter Market. This one is equally as miserable looking. You have piles of snow and slush. This is a great, I think, good food market allegory. You kind of have the one table, 1 or 2 tents. It's a smaller footprint. And this is true grit. So you can see here, if anyone's coming to this market right here, it's because they have an established relationship with those vendors and those market managers. Because that looks like a miserable place to get your fresh produce. But you see, we have people bringing their kids there, and still you have that colorful display. But this is really about just dressing for the weather. This is in BC, in Hastings. So Vancouver, a bit warmer, but it's a wet cold, which is a bit more miserable. And here you see a big transition from a summer market in a park. It's golden leaves everywhere, to your winter market. But I want to point out a few key things here. You still see down in that corner, someone's playing guitar outside in like -5 weather in the middle of the snow. I think Nicolette mentioned, keeping music and keeping some kind of community vibrancy going. And it's about just, there is a strategy around keeping your market looking and feeling the same, but just toughing it out. And when people see, a local musician with his like winter beater guitar still there and vendors still there, you get that that community attachment, right? If there is an element of, if they're suffering and if they can do it, I should come out myself and continue to support this. So sometimes just visibility during winter can lead to a lot of great traction. This is in Port Moody. So this is also in BC, but not in Vancouver. So similar idea, right? You have a classic market and they're just toughing it out through the snow. And really they haven't changed much of anything other than some warming centers here. So you can't see it on screen, but they do actually have small fireplaces that they've positioned around. And those were just loaned for free from a local hardware store. So back to community partnerships. If you show your visibility and if you show your intention to stick it out through winter, to be clear, it's a great guilt trip. Go to local partners and be like, we're freezing over here. Are you going to really let us just die in the cold? And often, 8 out of 10 times, they won't let that happen. So this is just an example of winter markets. They're toughing it out. Whether you're a good food market or winter market, they haven't changed operations very much. And they're relying on, community engagement, partnerships, and most importantly, like a real sense of customer trust and dedication. And that is what you can focus on through your warmer months as well. So when you think winter markets, when you think about planning, it's part of your year-round plan. You want to be preparing for your winter market as early as August or July, setting the seeds that you're going to be there and building that kind of customer dedication and loyalty. This isn't, it's Sweden, so we can't really take a good example from them because they're nuts. But they are a great winter culture, which we do not have in Toronto in the same way. And not to fast forward, but this is where COVID gives a big opportunity. We're being forced to go out into public spaces now in the middle of high winter. I don't know about you, but I've never been on more cold walks in my entire life, and I own a whole new range of weird pants to try and survive. So what we see here is it's a holiday market, and a great strategy for a winter market too is to grab on the holidays. Holiday market, Christmas markets are very popular, and you can use that as an anchor to kind of have an inflection point where a lot of folks come out. And really, there's so many holidays that occur over December and January. Take your pick. And also merge them together, back to kind of community assessment, figure out, who are the people in your community, what do they want to see, and then try and make that a winter event that brings people outside because they're a bit more used to it. This is just a great picture. So this is about, again, like just adapting yourself for winter. This guy has the most amazing coat I've ever seen. And I also want to draw attention to the woman in the bottom, in the right corner. She has what looks like wicker clogs on, I think. And I just want to say I really appreciate that. So thinking about creating a culture of warmth, of having your vendors and your staff over bundle, and just have some social media messaging, some newsletter messaging of a lot of people in Toronto, we dress from kind of point A to point B, and that depends on what our transportation is. But we want to kind of be ridiculous. We want giant coats, giant hats, provide blankets, really make it this outdoor cozy space. And the sky's the limit because I don't think anyone's going to ridicule you. And this is just a testament to true grit. This is in Yakutsk, Russia, and this is a winter fish market. So what I think is just obviously hilarious about this is this is at like 2 in the afternoon, by the way, and it is dark and it's just full of frozen fish. So I guess the point being is it is so possible to establish a culture of outdoor outdoor living, of shopping outside. We may not have the frozen fish and that kind of real, Russian tenacity, but when we look around the world for examples, there's a ton of hopeful reasons why we should attempt to be outside year round. This just goes on. So I think going past examples, I think we want to look at why we want to do this. And I think a lot of markets find themselves in positions where they have to be outside. But it is a big challenge. And I think for all the markets that we've worked with, good food markets, small fresh food markets, farmers markets, it is a daunting prospect that you shouldn't go into lightly. And I say this from personal experience because we have failed miserably about this. But really, what are the good benefits that we can attach ourselves to? The first is extending your potential revenue, whatever that means, whether it's fundraising, whether you're making some revenue from sales, or if you're a vendor type format where you're kind of charging a vendor fee of some kind, you can build out a year-round budget, and that's really important for sustainability. A lot of markets that can afford to pay the coordinator, for example, or even have like an honorarium to encourage that volunteer, it's so hard when they're off for 6 months of the year. You lose that momentum. And I think, as we all know, a solid center, that market coordinator, is sometimes the make or break between a successful market and ones that kind of peters out. Of course, maintain access. For good food markets, that's so important. Need does not end in winter. In fact, it often increases. So being able to have a good food market survive in place in the same place is great for communities that begin to rely on those markets. Visibility, that may seem kind of like the other two, but really it's about, again, building partnerships from the community, whether they're businesses or organizations or people, and showing your customer base that you're there year round and they can attach themselves to you. And you don't have to kind of do that spring media push that so many markets have to do every year to kind of just re-engage their community. And of course, building support. Related to the third, but any market, you want to develop that list of hardcore supporters of customers, whether they're 20, 50, 100, and involve them in your market as much as you can. These are future volunteers, future advisory committees, but you want to, if you're going that extra mile to stay outside, you should expect your customers to have that same kind of dedication. And by doing that, often they'll step up. Sometimes they won't, but sometimes they do. So I want to say, while it's a big challenge, we want to kind of make a summary of this. The real big benefit of staying in place is you're building year on year without that big winter gap, which so often can just kill all of your progress from the season before. And for the ones we've seen work, we see that momentum build and build and build, and they can get this year-round, year-to-year momentum. So to go on to the actual challenges and some pragmatic strategies that you can use to try and winterize your market, essentially. Obviously, weather is a big challenge. Blizzards happen. Sometimes you'll get snowed out. Occasionally, you just cannot operate in that space. And there are a number of things you can do, and this really depends on your resources. Some winter markets will have a backup pickup zone. So this could be the lobby of a building. It could be a condo lobby. It could be like really any recess that you can, a local church. Because often, United churches, for example, often have a lot of empty space. But you want to find a backup, either a cancellation with a solid communication strategy to let people know, or a fallback position where you can do a very pared down version of your usual market. Customer uptake. Back to what we said before, you will see a drop in customers, or you won't because you're Nicolette and you're awesome. But for most of us, we will, and we got to prepare for that. So it's about really leveraging the customers that spend a bit more money than others, and that's what you can do in your warmer months survey your customers, see who's out there, what's your economic dispersion, see who can lend some support and who needs support. The third would be, obviously sustainability. You want to have your warming stations, whether it's a fire pit or just blankets and some chairs. But you also want a dedicated space for your staff and volunteers to warm up. Customers will be there for an hour. They'll be there for up to 5 or 6 or 7. So often it could be a vehicle that someone has. It could be an agreement with a local cafe, coffee shop, lobby of somewhere to say, hey, can our staff warm up in here, once an hour? But make sure that your volunteers and your staff and vendors, if you have them, they really see that like you're half of their consideration. Personally, I made the mistake of not doing that. And then once again, it didn't go well. And then the fourth would be increasing costs. So when we get into tactics and strategies, it just costs more to operate in winter. And whether those funds come from partners and donations, we have materials donated directly. We got to look at, we're going to need more than what we have in the summertime. And a strategy needs to happen around that. So some quick strategies, and then I'm going to end with a personal story of failing upwards, as most of my career has been. But warming infrastructure, that we can get to. So that's a covered tent. These are expensive, so they are also great. Sarah's like, yes, they are. But what we found is often if you make a partnership with another market in your area, these are things that can be shared. And they're really valuable, but they're also really mobile. And what you can do with a situation like this is add a pretty affordable heater. These look terrifying, and they are terrifying. It's a heat cannon. But really what you can do is you can warm up about a 120 square foot tented space in about 5 minutes to about 18 degrees. So if you have, again, so seeing some laughs around there, it's so dangerous. You should definitely have someone monitoring this at all times. But it does work. So the example is if you have the resources, or if you know what you want to ask for, which is the most important, go to a Home Depot or Home Hardware, ask for this to be donated as a rental just on the market day. Typically the rental is about $15. And it's not a huge ask to kind of have that, especially if you have some great photos of kids and puppies and fresh food and just all that stuff that they want to see for a sponsor. The second would be obviously placemaking. I'm showering Nicolette with a couple of compliments, but just those trailers and the hay bales, like making a sense of place and space is so important if you have the resources to do that. Often hay bales are great because if you know a farmer or if you have a connection there, they'll often give them to you if they're right of the season. But whatever you can do to make it feel like you're not like those first examples where you're just kind of like a bare tent in a parking lot. And that is really up to what you have at your disposal. Marketing and promotion, I won't get too much into that, but obviously it's very important. But what I will say on that note is the timeline is really key. Get this idea of a winter market in people's heads in the fall or the late summer, and build that kind of community capacity and promotion. Whether it's just hand bombing, on flyers or in the neighborhood, if you can afford targeted social media posts, a $10 post can go a long way. And then back to kind of your fundraising, if you can build some funds from partners, even a couple $100 from donations, that can really make a big deal with social media or even some cost of printing flyers. We've kind of been over community support, but community engagement strategies are key here. And I would just say photos, photos, photos. As a market manager myself in the past, I've always been so busy. I haven't had the time to take good photography with my phone. And it kind of always goes to the back burner, but that's really how you show the community that you're there, and try and get as personal as you can. Show bundled up vendors and customers, customer testimonials, people that are like, acknowledge how cold it is, but they loved access to fresh food. So always keep that top of mind. We need to show the communities somehow what's happening here. And then last would be online support. There are a number of options. One of the things that Greenbelt Markets did last year with the pandemic was we provided local line platforms to about 50 markets around the area. And it's a relatively low cost online platform where people can order directly from you from a online store, and then pick up packages, whether it's from a vendor or you're ordering through FoodShare, or another kind of larger scale source. If you can afford it, or if you can find a sponsorship to help support it, it can be a great fallback. If you get blizzard out, you can retreat to a little warm recess somewhere and then run your online store. Also a thing that you can start to kind of raise some funds for in the fall. Because it can be a really big incentive if people have already purchased it online to get out there and pick it up. Okay. So this I found was the best strategy, barbecue. And this could be, vegetarian or vegan or whatever. But we kind of, one of the things, we leveraged some of our prepared food vendors that we knew in the summer to just come outside, and we just rented a big grill for them. And we just, hot food barbecue in the winter, it just flipped the whole script, right? It's a thing we see a lot in the summertime. And we found people were really willing to just kind of like have some barbecue outside. We had some seating, but it tricked people. And also when folks see warmth, they feel warm, which we thought was interesting. So creating warmish environments with smoke, with fire, the smell of food, that really helps create some sticking power. Do I have time, Tara, or am I over? I'm probably over.
You can talk for another maybe 2 minutes. I kind of
120 seconds. Here we go. All right. So our first project way back in the day was the Lestonville Farmers Market. We also had Fatia working there too. So I testified. She's amazing. But really, our winter market was an experience of just failing upwards. And we really leveraged a deep, unsuccessful experience to turn it into something great. So the moral of the story is, if you mess up the first time, often a lot of guilt and some begging can kind of turn that into a victory. So the story was a market that was very successful. We leveraged a small but dedicated following. We used community engagement, social media to spin that around to a kind of a sad story. And then we just cried for help until someone helped us. And that's not a bad strategy. So the Lestonville market always had a reputation for outdoor events. The first was called the Super Bowl, where we would make about 120 gallons of French onion soup, and that was a big fundraiser we do every year. We turned that eventually into a winter market, which was a disaster. It was outside, it was freezing cold. We did see people come. We pissed off a lot of vendors that won't talk to us again, some of them. But really, it was our first big learning experience of all the challenges involved and missed opportunities. So here are some miserable friends that we coerced into coming. But fire pits didn't work the way we wanted to. We had seating, we had blankets, we had a partnership from a local storage unit that gave us access to a truck. But all put together, it was just really, really challenging to make it sustainable. But what we did do was we captured a lot of great media, and we surveyed the folks that did come. So we established a small little core group of people that were really impressed by the kind of courage it took to drag people outside. And we did it 3 days in a row, which was also a massive mistake. Never do that. Weekly is great. So the next year, though, we had this kind of growing voice of bringing back the winter market. Of course, we refused because it was a miserable experience. But with that, we did a public ask to the whole neighborhood of who might have some space for us. We have this great following, small but dedicated. some great imagery of why it could be good as a placemaking strategy. And we had a local theater step up. They just bought a theater, they were restructuring it, and they offered us to come and do a market there. What that turned into after 3 years was the Glasgow Winter Market. This is a death trap right now, though. So this is just a wonderful image that we can't ever do again. But we went from a small, decrepit winter market outside of a brewery to this great indoor space that pre-COVID was a fixture of the community. And it was in an area of the East End that really needed some love. And it brought a ton of folks into the area. And that was the deal. So we pretty much had the space for free, but they needed to create a sense of place and identity in their new theater, and the market could provide that. So the story is of this whole thing, which I want to leave you with, is it's a great challenge to winterize your market, but there are huge benefits as well from being year-round. Building a year-round plan, whether it's revenue or donations or funding, and then you provide that community that doesn't just go quiet for 6 months of the year. So, moving forward, we are always happy to answer anyone's questions outside of this workshop about how to winterize your market. We're always here to give folks advice, and we have some great documents to give you. And I would just say, go for it, hang in there. And the worst thing that you're going to do is build a ton of respect in your community through your dedication to providing access to food as much as you possibly can. So thank you, everyone. And that is my presentation.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was, I got some of my chuckles in this morning, so I'm feeling better. I don't know if I meant to laugh at your failures, but I love the concept of you're failing upwards and willing to try all of these different things. Appreciate the reality check on winter markets and the amount of work that it takes.
So we have a couple of questions that are specifically for each of the presenters, but I will start off with a question for all of the markets, for all of the presenters, sorry. So we had a question come in asking how many folks are using volunteers and how are they recruiting them from their communities? So Dan, Chelsea, Maria, Nicolette, please feel free to jump in.
Sure, I can start. As we had said briefly in our presentation, when we were outside, we had a lot of volunteer interest. They would come weekly for different shifts. And since around the time when I started, so around November, December, our volunteer engagement has completely dropped. I think because of the lockdown, because of the cold weather. And so we need volunteers, but we also want to make sure that the volunteer experience is equitable and that we're giving back to them. So using we also offer all of our volunteers membership to the market, and after volunteer shift, pantry of food for them to take home. So right now, pushing more engagement so that we can get all our great volunteers back, because we have none currently.
Yeah, we have one part-time paid position to help coordinate the market. And then the rest of the work is done by volunteer work. And yeah, so we still have volunteers who are signed up, but most people just aren't able to or haven't felt comfortable being in the indoor setting. So again, looking forward to being outside again. But yeah, we recruited through social media posting on our Facebook and Instagram and on our website. And then we signed everybody up to a Slack channel so that people could communicate there and then sign up for shifts if they wanted to. So that's how we kind of managed it, as well as we've had some community volunteers from the community center come over to the market to volunteer as well.
Great. How about you, Nicolette? Is Nicolette still here?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. And I just missed the first part of that. I apologize.
Yeah, so just a question about volunteers. Are you using volunteers? How are you recruiting them?
Yeah, well, no, because of our COVID protocols, we're not accepting any volunteers at this time. So the market is staff only. There's a lot of interest, but just because of the changes, it's too difficult to manage. So we'll wait until the restrictions are lifted to consider that.
Okay, great. Dan, do you have anything to chip in on volunteers? I'm not sure if Dan is still here. Maybe we can just go to the next question, Fatia.
Sure. Okay. So the next couple of questions are for the Scarborough Co-op Market. So the first question is, what have you found to be the best way to engage people in person? What were the ways that ended up being the most successful? And I think because, you know, Mabelle and the Greenbelt Farmers Market Network, they also do a number of in-person engagement. So please feel free to jump in as well.
I'll talk a bit about now, and then I would like to hear what Chelsea has to say about the beginning of the market. Right now, for me, it's just really breaking down any sort of barriers and just being as human with folks as possible, starting conversations with them, and then when they request things at the market, doing everything possible to follow. Just trying to be as human as possible, I would say.
Yeah, and for us, we did have some planned activities, like it was kind of mentioning that we're supposed to kind of hopefully connect with some people, and we had to cancel them just for safety. And we also planned to go to the buildings and kind of do a little pop-up like table of produce to get people interested and then come over. We weren't able to do that yet, but those were kind of our ideas. So yeah, meeting people where they were at and kind of doing little pop-up things. But we were able to meet people in person, mostly through the community center. So connecting with the daycare program, there was a summer camp that was running when we started. So we met a lot of the staff there. And we kind of grew from that as well.
Okay, amazing. Nicolette, Dan, do you have things to add?
I think that obviously we have that in-person connection because folks come to the park, but also Mabelle Arts, because we're an arts-based organization, we already have other programming. So although people aren't able to connect on site, we have virtual programming, like Welcome to the Neighborhood. I had mentioned the listening room. So that's, they did come to the market and they had the storytelling net, and they were able to connect with community members while they were waiting to get into our shopping market, our shopping model. And then we also have our youth programming, so growing places and young creators. So all of those programs were virtual, but we still sort of have that connection, and we all kind of communicate and share information about each other's programming. So we, it's not in person all the time, but there are several connections that are maintained.
Nicolette, you've mentioned a couple of times this story net. Can you tell us what that is exactly?
Yeah, it's a net. It's a big wooden stick, and it's got a net attached to it. And then Michael and Melanie, who were part of the listening room, would come to help out at the market. And as folks were lining up, they would talk to them, just stories about their lives, and they would jot down some notes. And then on a circle attached to the net, they would post their stories. So we'd collect these stories because Mabelle Arts has a rich history of storytelling, and we would save them. And it's amazing how people open up. And we found out so much about our community members. And then also it had a calming effect, right, for people who are gathering and waiting in line. And it also, I think, it's a very dignified way of having people wait to get in to access food, and then also having that connection and that history. So sort of fast forward to our December market, that was a much bigger market for us. And we had tote bags designed. One of our illustrators designed a Mabelle Arts tote bag, and we filled it with goodies because we were going to be closed for 2 weeks. But inside that bag, through our art programming, there were amazing storytelling cards with community members who had contributed. They were matched with an image, and then all of our members who arrived for market that day got a bag as a gift and one of the boxes of storytelling cards. So this sort of interrelational programming really covers all the bases for us, and allows us to sort of maintain that friendship and connection with everyone.
Yeah, it definitely seems like having that human touch, making sure to follow up and have people see that they're represented at the market is a really, really effective and important way to keep community engaged. Dan, if you're still here, did you have anything to add on how to keep folks engaged?
Yeah. I think obviously, COVID changed everything. I think a really great kind of low cost way to do that is obviously social media. Love the story. That's so cool. We've done some simple things of just posting recipes on a Facebook group, and then kind of having like a really small incentive, like $3 of market bucks, which you can just write in a napkin. And then also one thing that we've done, unfortunately, can't take credit for it, but my colleague Madeline works a lot with good food markets and our emergency food programs we do at the Food Hub. And there we actually gave people little art packages to take home. And then they got to post what they were doing and then bring back some finished artwork the next week. And, it's like, there's not a huge outcome to that, but it was really nice just everyone sharing the little artworks. It was something to kind of bring away from the market. And while we can't really engage physically like how we want to, we need to use mental connections to kind of feel like we're still part of something there. And then also, I think we'll see that this summer, especially, or and all off into the next winter, we're going to be able to, I think, bring some folks back together in certain spaces. So, having like a fireplace, and maybe folks can like have a sign saying like "forward to a fire." Yeah, so social media is great, and then anything to just show what you did with the food, I think has been really successful.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so our next question is specifically for Scarborough Co-op, but again, other folks can jump in. So how were you folks able to get your seed funding, and where have you been able to get that money from? And so folks can kind of speak to more generally what your funding avenues are. That'd be really great.
Yeah, so we were able to start the market based on funding that we got through Community Food Centers Canada. So they had a program called Market Greens, and you could apply to start either a new market, or if you're in an existing market, they also had funding to run a program to help basically subsidize the market to help people get it at a lower cost, or some amount weekly for free, so that they could come and shop for the market. So we applied for that and were able to get that earlier this last year, 2020. So we have gotten that, and then we have the support from the West Scarborough Neighborhood Community Center, and they offer a lot of support through infrastructure and using their facilities. And then FoodShare has supported us as well. And so the three organizations kind of help support us in our programming. Yeah. So that's kind of where our support comes from.
Okay, Nicolette, Dan.
I mean, speak a little more generally to that. If Nicolette, I think if you wanted to say something first.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are private donations, obviously, but we've also been able to secure some funding from Daily Bread, from FoodShare. We're secondary program members, so hence the Daily Bread offering, and Ontario Trillium Foundation, various grants around food security.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, there are some great generalist grants out even right now, such as the Healthy Communities Grant, which is just made for a good food market when you kind of go through the applicant guide. I think one strategy we've seen work a lot with folks we've worked with or ourselves, is finding an institutional organization in your community that works in food security or just in your field, whatever your market's theme or like mission is, and trading placemaking for support, whether it's materials, whether it's funding, or even just like a property to be on. Really leveraging community imagery has been really helpful, and then proposing to tie in programs. Find out what they're already doing, approach them being like, this food program you do, it's perfect. Maybe our customers, they're in that demographic, they could apply for that at the market table. So really leveraging what's already there, and then finding your value so you can make a good pitch.
Okay, amazing. We have three more questions. These were specifically for Mabelle, but again, please feel free to jump in. How did you work with the city to allow for semi-permanent infrastructure in a public park?
That's an interesting question. The park is not a City of Toronto park. Rather, it's a part of the property owned by Toronto Community Housing. Ever since the activities started on behalf of Mabelle Arts, I would classify it as, just guerrilla artists taking over the space and putting some stuff down. And that's just how it happened. And because community members demanded that and appreciated it, we've just kind of gained traction, and people want to come back and see it, so we just keep on putting more things down. And they're demanding it and they're using it, and so there's nothing too official, but because we're so committed to the beautification process, we're going to keep on doing it.
Mm-hmm. And so one last question. I believe you folks have kind of touched on it here and there, but obviously navigating COVID protocols and as the weather starts to warm up, what precautions or logistical considerations are you folks making sure to make when setting up your outdoor market? So that means, spacing, setting up specific, waiting areas for people. How are you folks intaking people? All of that kind of thing.
So I can speak to that. I don't have a picture of it at the moment, but we actually hired a safety monitor lead. So one of our staff, our program director, is taking that on for the time being. And the sole purpose of that role is to make sure that people are socially distanced. It's kind of unavoidable when you have numbers that are that high, wanting to access the park, that they'll sort of self position themselves. So her sole role is to make sure that people are socially distanced. And then from that previous photograph, I'm sure you saw Leah with the interesting hat and the megaphone. That's our entertainment. And through that entertainment and animation, we are keeping people socially distanced. So it's actually a bit of an art show. And, Leah will be asking people, what's your favorite color or what's your favorite song? It's that sense of entertainment that keeps people safely distanced. Within the market, we also have a process of communication so that we're monitoring the total number of people at any one time. So we've changed our registration, and we also communicate with hand signals to make sure that we never have more than, like, depending on the day, 8 people at a time. And that's going to be the case for as long as we need to.
Okay.
And everything else, sanitizer, masking, of course. We are always reminding our community members, you know, if you're not properly masked or socially distanced, then there's no access to the market, and then messaging it in a way that is, you know, please keep the market safe so that we can stay open.
And we do want to let everybody go for lunchtime. But here is the contact information for us at FoodShare and for all of the speakers that we had today. And thank you to all of you, Nicolette, Chelsea, Maria, and Daniel, for all of the great presentations, great ideas. I know I've got some in my head for my market now. Always learning things from other markets, and really appreciate your contributions today. And for all of you who are here participating and attending with us today, thank you for being here. We do have a short feedback form that we will send you by email, and we would really appreciate it if you just take a minute and fill that out for us. So thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Amazing.
Thank you.
All
Nice
right.
to meet
This is
everybody.
terrific. Very informative. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Have a great day.
Bye.